Hey guys, it's Varien again, here with the perfect mix tutorial. Now, I kind of hesitated there saying perfect because just like saying advanced music theory is subjective, I also think getting the perfect mix is subjective because getting the perfect mix implies that there is one specific, not only method, but there's only one specific type of mix that works and sounds good, which is absolutely false. I mean, there are a ton of examples of people who are pushing the limits of what it means to have a good mix or a unique mix. Anything from the sort of super clean top 40 type, Interscope Records mixing versus people like XXX Tentacion and Bones who clip the hell out of their music, and that's for an aesthetic purpose, and people like Porter Robinson and Kid who sort of have everything blown out and bright, but that's to achieve a certain aesthetic. So once you can sort of find what sounds good and is effective, but also doesn't stab your ears, also known as the ice pick effect, I think you're pretty good. So today we're just going to look at sort of mixing a typical EDM song. Now, I'm using a construction kit for efficiency's sake. This one is from Skiphonics. Shout out to Skiphonics for making some great sample packs over the past couple of years. Has definitely saved my butt when it comes to commercial music and just idea generating and stuff like that. So I've basically got this song, and why don't we just dive right into it, and I'll explain my thought process as we go along. Now, once again, this is how I mix. This is how I mix, and when you guys learn, I seriously implore you, please find what works for you based off of what you've seen me do. If you kind of see a more efficient way of doing things or a different way that's more effective, please do it. I've just been doing mixing and using my ear a certain way for a certain amount of time, and it's evolved over the years, so please find what works for you. Let's check this out, see what it sounds like just unmixed. We're in FL Studio. If you don't use FL, I mean, we've got our audio tracks here, we've got our mixer tracks here, and then sort of just each individual sample sort of corresponds. So as you can see, there's no mixer tracks, everything's the same volume, and everything's kind of just flatline. But yeah, let's check it out and see what's going on. Here we go. Sorry about that. And then it loops again. So it's not the worst sounding thing, but it's definitely not exciting. It's definitely not, I in my opinion, accomplishing what it's setting out to do. So let's help this guy out. Let's help this song out. And if you hear any nice rumbles in the background, of course, being in Florida during the summer, which this video is being recorded in, we're going to be getting some nice storms here in a little bit. So let's start out by just going through sort of, let's take a step back is what I'm getting at. Let's take a step back and sort of go through the elements of what genre are we in, and therefore what should we be focusing on. And you'll find that each genre, you focus on different elements and you highlight different elements, different instruments are going to be louder than others. Different things are going to have more importance. So with this sort of 100 BPM mid-tempo sort of, Chainsmokers tropical sort of feel, it's not unlike a lot of EDM mixing. So what is most important in EDM? Let's just take a step back. Well, we really like those hard transients. Now, what do I mean by transient? It means just the initial millisecond of a sound. That first thump. Not the entirety of a kick drum, let's say, but just literally the first slice. How convincing is it? Or if it's a string, maybe it doesn't really have a transient. Maybe it's not. Maybe, the attack is delayed. So we want to really get those transients going. In the kick drum, we definitely want the bass to hit hard, both the sub bass, and in this case, there's no really mid-range bass. There is sort of this chordal structure, so I guess that would be your sort of mid-element. But if this was something like drum and bass or dubstep, you would definitely have that as your main element. And then in this, it's a clap. I would also say snare is on the exact same priority as a clap in this case. So just to summarize real quick with EDM, kick, snare, bass. That's what defines EDM, and I think many of you will agree that in drops, that's what you want to hear. You want to hear the punchy kick, the snare that slams you, or the interesting, depends on the genre, like more of these future bass, future beats kind of guys have really amazing sort of log drum and other sort of percussive hits as their snares, and it's really cool. But I think everyone can agree that bass is also probably the most important thing, if not equally as important as the kick and the snare. Everything else is sort of auxiliary. And by auxiliary, I just mean secondary. So let's dive in. And the very, very first thing that I'm going to do is I'm just going to isolate the kick drum. Again, this is my method. So if you want to go ahead and isolate, the sub bass or the mid elements first and work that way, whatever's most comfortable for you. So I'm just going to go in with this kick drum, and I'm going to put it on mixer track 1. And let's listen to it on its own. So here's what it sounds like. It's not really exciting. So the first thing with mixing is just checking the volume, checking where it sort of sits. So kick drum, we know that we want it to be really present in our mix. So having it be the same volume as everything, that's no good, man. So let's take it all the way up. Okay, now that's too much. So then you scale back until you find the sweet spot. And that's one of my sort of tips. A lot of people would sort of argue to go down and find the sweet spot, but what I find is that people can sort of push or you can push farther. People will think they find the sweet spot here, but maybe the sweet spot's there. Because in EDM, we want this to really fill a big space, and we want it to have that impact. So let's find that sweet spot again. I just totally messed that up. Okay. There you go. So let's open up the mixer channel, see what's going on. I have this window detached from my second monitor. Excuse that. So this is the mixer in FL Studio, and so the first thing that I want to do with this kick drum is compress it. I really want to bring it out. And for time's sake, because there's so many possible, again, it really depends on what you're going for. The kick sample that you have, you know, if it's already compressed, does it even need compression? You know, that's the sort of line of thinking that you sort of need to go with, is what does this specific sample need? So for the sake of time, and also I do this a lot, I've found that FL Studio's compressor that's built in, their preset for drums is right on the money, like 75 to 80% of the time. It's damn good. So take a screenshot and try out, you know, these settings on your own compressor and see if it sounds good. Maybe you need to take the threshold up or down. Maybe you need to take the release further down, or the attack for a quicker transient, you know, sort of feel. So let's see what that sounds like just with the compressor on it. Okay, so it's already a little bit more exciting and present, but it is louder. And that's because there is this gain knob, which is kind of, it's just literally a volume knob. But also compressing sort of takes the low points in a, let's say, a sequence, and makes them high. It takes the high sequences, makes them low. Basically just equalizes things. It compresses everything into a nice, tight sort of group of elements. So I've got the compressor, and it's important, in at least in FL, with your effects chain, to put the EQ after the compressor, because you want to equalize what's been compressed instead of compressing what's been equalized. Gives you a little bit more control. So I'm going to be using the FL Parametric EQ2, and what I'm looking for is what does this specific sample need? And with kick drums, you often are looking to just sort of give it a little bit of a bump so it thumps. One thing that I do with every single instrument ever is a high pass. Unless it's the sub bass, there is a sub somewhere, somehow, in almost every sample. Even if it's a sample of wind blowing or chimes chiming a mile away, there is still some way that these sub frequencies, even just a little bit, bubble up. And you might say, well, it's not a big deal if it's only just a sort of little tiny rumble. Well, guess what, dude? If you say that about enough instruments, you know, frequencies add up. So if you say that enough about, you know, sub frequencies not mattering, it's gonna add up to something that sounds bubbly and is competing with your actual sub bass, and you're gonna wonder why you have that rumble, why you have that weird sort of muddiness. So high pass everything except for the sub source, whether that be something like a sine generator, a synth, an 808, what have you, whatever the sub source is. That's the only thing. Sub is very, very tricky, so don't mess around with it too much. So let's go ahead and just sort of move this guy, and then we're gonna just bump it up just a little bit. We're gonna listen to this as we do this. I like to mix as I go along. So maybe we cut too much. There you go. There you go. Okay. So now we're getting just a little bit of that thump back, and that's pretty cool. That's exactly what we want. And that's pretty much it for the kick drum. So now let's go into the clap, because that's sort of our second most important element in terms of just making sure we get a nice boom clap, you know, the main percussion of these drops. So I'm going to put it in bus 2. Definitely do not want it in the same bus as the kick drum, but we are still going to compress it. And yes, I know what a lot of you are going to say. I can just bus everything to one compressor. You can do that. But just for this tutorial's sake, we're just going to do it mixer track by mixer track. So again, just that amazing drum preset, great settings, different EQ, okay? I'm sorry, I opened up FabFilter, which not everyone has, but a lot of you guys who are watching with FL Studio definitely have parametric EQ, so I apologize for that. Let's check out the clap with just the compressor. Okay. So I think that for now we can sort of bump up. You know, EDM has a lot of what's called additive EQ, which allows you to literally bump things up, where things in nature tend to subtract, but this is electronic music, so we can have all sorts of fun. So let's try and brighten this puppy up without getting the ice pick effect. So let's just bump up maybe the sizzle a little bit. Again, let's listen and mix. You see how that sort of changed the personality? It sort of grew as we sort of opened up those frequencies a little bit more. That's what you're looking for with electronic this sort of mixing is really bringing out the personality of something. And actually that can be said about most mixing, but with electronic music, additive allows you to play around because you can sort of achieve, you can sort of add in frequencies that weren't there to begin with, or highlight ones that really aren't, you know, there. So we're going to add just a little tiny bit of reverb. We don't want it to go boom, ka, boom, ka, you know, that kind of stuff. But we do want to give it a little bit of room. So I'm just going to take this wet knob and just kind of put it, let's say like, I don't know, 20%. Let's listen to what that sounds like. I think that sounds healthy. Now, that's the sort of thing that you need to be having a conversation with yourself about is, does it sound good? I mean, you've been listening to music. You're doing music professionally. You want to do music professionally. Wherever you are in your career. You've developed an ear, you've developed a taste, so you should know what sounds good and what doesn't. So let's pair the kick and the clap and see how they play off of each other now that they are both mixed. So personally, I'd pick a different kick sample. Not the biggest fan of this one. I think it's actually kind of flat, but again, for efficiency's sake, we are using a complete pre-constructed song. I think it sounds okay, but I think we can bump up the clap just a bit. So let's try that out. And you will make those micro adjustments as you add in more things. Don't be afraid. Sometimes you might feel overwhelmed. You might feel like, I have no idea if this sounds good or not. Stop the music. Walk away. Don't listen to any other music. Don't get frustrated. Just walk away. Just take a deep breath. Come back to it in 5 minutes. See it again. See what happens. It's not the end of the world, but it does get frustrating when you can't nail that mix, right? It's really annoying. However, one really great thing is you have the control when producing, so you have that control to sort of step back and either literally step back go away from the computer, or sort of just do this motion, which is like, I don't know what this clap, I don't know where it belongs, so I'm just going to take it down to 0. I'm going to take it all the way up, and I'm just going to just find the sweet spot. I'm just going to just keep cranking this puppy until I think it sounds good against that kick. So just... Okay, there you go. And then you feel great about yourself again. Then you feel like you know what you're doing. Okay, so we got the boom, clap sort of sound. This is our lead. It's a vocal chop, Chainsmokers type style. It's also got a little bit of reverb on it, but we're gonna sort of tweak it just a little tiny bit. So again, we're gonna put this, I'd say, on channel mixer 5, because I like to differentiate, you know, grouping the drums near each other, and then if I add drums, then, you know, I might group it in a different sort of numbering. But usually I like to do 1 through 5 as my main drums, and then the rest is other instruments, and then again adding other drums. You just sort of try and group it just to make some sort of order out of that chaos. So let's look at this guy. And he doesn't need any compression. I think we can go right to EQ with this, so let's check this guy out. I think that given that this is not, you know, a dubstep track where one fat bass is going to be taking up the majority of your ears, that it's actually going to be sort of the lead to a bunch of chords. Doing this enough, I can sort of predict that there's going to be a lot of midsection stuff happening, not only in this sample, but also in the chords. So I'm probably going to do some subtractive EQ, because too much frequency in the low end creates rumble and muddiness. Too much frequency in the midsection sort of creates this sort of amateur sounding fullness. It sounds like everything's too loud. And too much frequency in the high end has that ice pick effect where it's like, tss, tss, oh, ow, ugh, stop. So let's take a look at what this guy sounds like. So, yeah, he's, you know, FL Studios EQ does consider this the mid, and I would agree. And it does hit quite, yeah, right on the money. So I'd probably take it down and just try and see if I can find a cleaner sounding version of it. Let's just try that out. And first of all, let's turn it up, because this is one of our main elements. So let's see. Okay, so I actually did some more subtraction than I thought I would. I actually took this down quite a bit, and I took the highs down a little bit, just because it does have a lot of highs, and I know the chords will, and I know the hi-hat will, and I know the clap will. So you see what I'm getting at. You know, over the entire song, and this is really it. If you're going to take away anything from this video, this is what I'm ultimately getting at. Is when you subtract, you're probably going to want to add something to fill that void. When you add something, you're probably going to want to subtract elsewhere to sort of allow that addition. That way it sounds like a clean, natural, equalized mix. So I'm probably just going to throw a little bit of more reverb on, just a tiny bit. One thing with getting a good mix is just making sure they're in the same room. So not making sure that, you know, one, you know, element sounds too sort of out of place from the others. You want them all to sort of blend together, and one way they can play together like that is just making sure they're in the same reverb space and the same treatment is done to the majority of what you're working with. So again, we're going to take the wet knob low. I'd actually, let's see. I'd actually add just a tad bit more. Yeah, that's cool. Wait for the tail to make your judgment. And what do I mean by the tail? That. The ending. So I think we're done for now with this. Let's see how it compares with our other main elements. We have one more main element, and then the other ones are going to be pretty easy to mix in. So let's see how this stacks up against the kick. And right now, we are mentally in uncharted territory. I have no idea what this is going to sound like. Okay, so I think the clap could be taken down a bit, but we're going to do some micro adjusting. So watch my mouse. Remember that these are the volume knobs. Watch my mouse as I sort of listen, because I think that also comes from, you know, one's own taste and one's own preferences and influences, is listening crucially and finding the sweet spots. So let's just do some micro adjusting for now, right here. You see what I mean by micro? It's just tick, tick, tick. Because once you find the sweet spot, I've rarely found it to be the case that you have to completely sort of, unless you come across a whole new sample that changes, you know, the drop entirely or changes the mood entirely. Once you find the sweet spot, you're going to stay around there. So the micro adjustments are just exactly that. They're micro. So let's get into the sub bass. The sub bass for this, yeah, why not? Let's put it in a mixer track, and let's put it on channel 6. So it's not in the drums, it's more on the instruments side, and we're not going to mess with this. Again, you don't want to mess with your sub bass too much. The one thing that I would recommend is just sing, and let's solo this out. Just sing if there's any weirdness happening. I'd say past here, sort of this 450, 500 mark, and I mean that in hertz, like down here. So let's just see. Not really. No, not a lot. So, and in terms of volume, I mean, sub bass is so powerful. That's why, you know, when you're listening to electronic music in your car, you can hear the whole entire frequency, but everyone outside you just hears whoom, whoom. Is because since these are deeper frequencies, they're actually thicker physics-wise. And so they penetrate walls. And they penetrate car walls, essentially. It's a nightmare. You're not going to hear, you know, through a wall. You're definitely going to hear whoom. And I think anyone who's been stuck in traffic can attest to that. Thank you, everyone who likes trap music. Including me. I could be that guy sometimes. Depends on the day. So, let's check the volume of this. And the way that I'm actually going to do this is by looking up here in FL. There is a way that there's like sort of like a master EQ, and you can achieve the same thing through adding an EQ bus on your master, you know, mixer. You can. I'm sorry about that. Brain fart for a second. You can go ahead and, you know, do something like this and check the mix of everything. But luckily, FL does something really nice for you, and they go ahead and just sort of See, the monitor master, that's what it says up here. So I'm just going to check and see how loud this is, because you don't want your sub bass to be too loud at all. And it would be great if we turn that on. So it could be louder. I'm looking at these spikes right here, and it could be just... And I will probably be adjusting it once I get the chords in, because I want them all to blend together. Okay, so let's add in all of our main elements, and then we're just gonna pretty much go through the auxiliary chords and the auxiliary percussion. So here's what the main elements sound like together. So again, I just adjusted the clap because again, as soon as I hit play, my brain immediately went to, whoa, kind of loud there. Just take it down just a notch, and quite literally just a notch. This comes from mixing music a lot. This comes from listening to music a lot. So be crucial. Let's go into some hi-hats. This is something that a lot of people tend to make a little bit too loud, and I want to show you the effectiveness of auxiliary percussion and how effective it can be at a lower volume than you think, and it can save you some frequencies, because right now we don't have a lot of frequencies to spend. We are already, with our main elements, sort of filling up a lot of space, and we don't want to take up too much more, but we do want to fill it up at the same time. So how do you do that? Well, this is where you gotta get smart. So I'm going to put this in track 3, give it the old compressor, give it the old preset, these wonderful knob settings, and I'm going to look at this in a equalizer. You guys are totally seeing a pattern here, and let's just check them out at the current volume. Let's check this out. I think it's a bit harsh. That's my interpretation, but for you might be just fine. So I'm actually going to take this down, and it's okay that I take this down, because remember, there's going to be other stuff that are going to be adding to it. Now you're going to say, hey Varien, you said that the hi-hats were going to fill in the top. Well, I mean, just so, because I'm taking this down a notch, you know, doesn't mean that it's not adding frequencies. Actually, it's very much still adding to the frequencies. So much so that I'm just going to take this down too. There you go. Quick tip, if you want to find out the sort of personality of a sample, start taking these little EQ, I guess you would just call them, not like, I guess you would just call them buttons. I don't know what the actual term is for these specific EQ things that you use to adjust it, but you make notches out of them, and what a notch is sort of like this really steep hump, and sometimes you can make it really steep and really narrow. And to highlight the personality of a sound, just take it all the way to the top and then take it all the way to the bottom and see what it's bringing out, what it's adding to the track. So the format, it's called, is chirky. It's funny, but it actually matters. So let's go ahead and play around by taking this down, up, and all around. So I think that initial hit, that, you know, I think that's a little bit harsh, and that actually happens in a much lower cymbal, so I'm taking this down quite far. And let's see how it plays against the kick and the drum. that's actually not that bad. A lot of people tend to have this sort of thing where they feel like they need the hats to be heard, so they take the volume up. But as cool as that is and as right as that sounds, you're asking a lot by even just bumping it up 2, 3, 4 decibels. You're asking a lot of the frequencies. You can get the same shuffle and the same effect just by taking it down. And yes, I will be adjusting this as well. So let's go to this Foley thing. So it's just adding a groove. Really cool Foley thing. I'm actually going to put this in the same bus as my hats. Now, some people's alarms might be going off, but for efficiency's sake, I think that these personalities sort of exist in the same realm. So let's just try it out. I mean, Jesus, this is music. This is not chemistry where if we slip up one thing, we blow up a building. This is music. We're having fun. Okay, yeah. I mean, so then you add in everything and you see how I just took the hats down and it didn't affect the groove, but it sounds a little bit cleaner now? It's because there's more breathing space. So let's add back in our lead, see where we're at, and our sub. See where we're at so far before we add in the final element, which is the chords. I'm going to be EQing all the chords as if they were one thing. But we'll get to that in just a second. So let's just see where we're at right now. Okay, so again, if you were watching my mouse closely, you saw the sort of micro adjustments that I was doing. And again, that's just natural. That will come with time. If you're wondering, how did he know to take it down that much? Well, I didn't. I just sort of used my ear and just sort of let the mouse take it to where my ear said, that sounds about right. So we've got this chord block, and it's broken up into 3 different layers. And let's listen to them all at the same time. Yeah. Very chain smokers. We get it. So we're not going to put a compressor on this. Let's just go straight for the EQ. And let's go ahead and sort of listen to 1. See where that gets us. See if we need to actually break this up or if we can bust them together to create one sound. Again, just playing around. Don't worry about this. Just have fun. There's the high that we just took out of the hi-hats and some other stuff. So remember, we were going to add it somewhere. Here it is. We took this down. The kick and the clap and many other things are going to fill this up all together, so don't worry. And don't worry, we're still going to do the high pass. Not too many other things. I mean, this is a construction kit, so this has already been sort of pre-mixed, but I think I can get a cleaner mix out of this mix. There hasn't been too many sub conflicts, but I did notice there was in this at least. So let's go ahead and just get rid of that just to be safe. We don't want to cut too much into this and get the telephone effect. We don't want to do too much where we're getting sub problems, but we want just enough where it has body. And that's going to be around there. And yes, to put it in the same room, just the tiniest bit of verb. Not too much decay. We don't want our chords blurring together, but we do want them in a room. I'm listening for the tail. So I just bumped up the decay, which is the tail. I just bumped it up, God, a hair. I mean, if you saw that, it was just a little tiny bip. So let's see what this guy sounds like on his own. The second layer. So his format is actually already really pronounced. Oh, 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 oh. So let's see what it sounds like if we just dump him into the same exact bus as this other guy that he's basically brothers to. I mean, these are all sort of playing the same chords. They're just a different type of synth. So we might actually have to go back into the EQ and equalize them all together. But let's just find out. Adding in the other one. I think that actually sounds okay. So it all comes down to this, ladies and gentlemen. This guy. I think... This is where you take a pause. You just try it out. And if it doesn't work, it takes what? Less than 3 minutes, 2 minutes to set up a whole new EQ for it. So it doesn't hurt to save yourself some time. Also doesn't hurt to just do it and just equalize everything individually. So I think given that we bumped up the brightness, I think let's just hear. Okay. So I'm going along this journey with you guys. So that's why there's brief pauses. There's sort of these moments where I don't talk or I fumble or I go, okay, is we're on this journey together. And I'm finding out right now that bussing them all together may work, but not with this setting. So let's go ahead and just kind of play this and see where we can make further adjustments where this makes sense. Ooh. Bright. Ooh, that's... Okay. So I gave this some more body by bumping this sort of low-mid section up, and I gave it a really nice sizzle. Now, the moment of truth is adding all of that back in one at a time. So let's add in the sub, because it is a tonal thing. So let's see if this all creates one big, beautiful, chordal, tonal thing, or if we're in trouble. I think it's pretty damn good. So let's add in another tonal part, and that's this vocal lead, which is going to be a lot louder, but we're going to listen to everything at the end, make our final micro adjustments, and then we're going to call it a day as far as mixing goes. Mastering is a whole nother thing. Usually, just a quick note about mastering. If you're going to do it yourself, really get to know the essence of limiting. I hear a lot of stuff that sounds way too glossy, way too compressed. Don't shy away from things like Lander. Their algorithm is actually fantastic right now. And chances are, if you're releasing with a label, they have their own labeling engineers. And that's exactly what mastering is. I mean, a lot of producers are saying, how do you get your mastering so well? And what they really mean to say is, how do you get your mixing so well? Because mastering just sort of excites and widens things and makes it louder and, club ready and album ready. That's an engineer's job. They usually have analog equipment, and it's actually a different scope of audiology than music production. So don't get too down on yourself if you can't do mastering that well. It's not the biggest issue in the world. Really focus on the mix, and your mastering will be just fine. I promise you. Okay, so it's not that bad. I'm a little bit worried that the chords are taking up, since they're stacked like that, they are taking up a lot of frequencies. So I'm watching them. I'm watching them as I add in the kick, the clap, hi-hats, and the Foley. So yeah, everything sounds pretty decent, but my suspicions were right. Now, all of these have different personalities. Like this one is high pitched, so this one can kind of come down. I'm looking for one that has just a little bit of body to boost, and the other ones can come down. All of them don't need to be, crying out for attention. Try that guy and this guy while lowering this guy. All together now. So I'd call that a pretty decent mix, and what the heck, I thought we were going for the perfect mix. Well, again, for efficiency's sake, we used a construction kit. And what really, really makes a great mix, dare say a perfect mix, is good samples. So I would definitely replace that clap. I'd replace that kick. I'd replace the hi-hat. I'd probably add in a little bit more body into the sort of tonality of things. Maybe I would actually, really quick, I can actually demonstrate a little bit of sound design, quote unquote, by taking the sub, making a duplicate by clicking this little doodad right here. I'm going to make unique, so I get like a second guy, and pitching it up an octave so I get a mid bass, a mid sub bass. And that sounds like this. And there's your big body, that's... So then you balance that against the original sub, and it would help if it was on. Ooh, see, now that's heavy. That's some bass. And since this has a format of you kind of want to take it down so it's not crying out for attention. Add it back in. So there you go. Another thing, the similar sort of thing, you can take the clap, drop it down an octave after making a duplicate, so you get a more deeper tone, and you just sort of, not the same volume, you just take this down, but at least it has that in there. So let's these are the sort of things that you need to be playing with. And I think it sounds a lot better now since we added in that second mid sub bass. I really think that it brought out the body a lot. So this is really, again, the line of thinking when it comes to getting that perfect mix is balancing everything out. If you feel like it's not, doesn't have enough body, try adding more things in the mid section. And how do you do that while keeping things in the same relative timbre, that is to say the same texture, the same room, the same feeling? Well, take some similar elements and octave down, octave up. It's part of sound design, and there is a video we'll be touching on that a lot deeper. As far as, grouping stuff together, just making sure everything's balanced, making sure that for everything that you take up and do additive EQ, somewhere you're doing subtractive so that it equals out, and not everything is and just blown out of proportion, unless you're Porter Robinson, and then you can do that because that's part of your aesthetic. But if you listen to his earlier stuff, that kid had some fantastic mixing. So once you get this sort of general mixing down, then you can start to have fun with textural mixing, and that's a lot of fun, but it's very dangerous and can get very bad very quickly. So get this down, and then you can start to really, really have fun. One step at a time, my friends. Anyways, I want to thank you guys so much for watching this. I really do hope that this sort of thing helps you in your own practice. And until next time.